Okay, the Crimson Ghost is back with another long and boring mask video. This time it's going to be on one of my all-time favorite masks, the Don Post skull. I'm going to try and tell you everything I know about this mask because there's a lot of variations and there's usually a lot of questions surrounding these masks. And back in 2011 or 2012, I wrote a pretty extensive thread on these titled The Unofficial History of the Don Post Skull. And that was on the HMA.net site, the Halloween Mask Association. So, the reason I did it was because at the time I had about 30 or 35 of these skulls in my collection. And unless you had that many in front of you, you would never have seen a lot of the different variations and little changes throughout the years. So I figured I would kind of write down a post or a thread with one place housing all of the things I learned and all the research I've done, and kind of try and squash all the disinformation that was out there regarding these things. I also interviewed quite a few people that worked for Don Post Studios back in the day, and I did get a lot of information from other collectors who are friends of mine. So I didn't come up with everything on my own, but a lot of this I did. This video is shot in several segments at different times, so if I repeat myself at times, I apologize, but it was a lot to remember and a lot to go over. So I'm not claiming to be the biggest expert on skulls in the world, but a lot of this info is true. I may have made a mistake or two along the way, but from what I know and all the research I've done, everything in this video is pretty on the money. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you are not a big fan of these skulls, you may just want to stop now because this is a long one. Most people mistaken these white skulls as the original 1967 skulls. On eBay, you'll always see people posting them as the 1967 Don Post skull, when in reality, these white ones came out closer, probably to 1980 or so. I'll get into these later, but the original old school first run skulls looked more like this. They were brown, they had like a nice rich brown base coat, and then a light creamy top coat like this. And they were actually made of a whole different material, a different sort of vinyl called plastisol. It was like a PVC type of compound that predated the vinyl that's in these skulls. So characteristic of this stuff is the masks are kind of stiffer. They feel older. If you took this thing and started squeezing it, you could probably crack it or smash it. Some of them held up better than others, but it's definitely a different mixture altogether, and it is called plastisol. There's actually different names for it, but that's pretty much the official name I believe I found for it. One thing I want to mention is I said the oldest skulls look like this one. However, this one was produced in 1970 or 71. I know that because a big collector I know bought this exact skull when he was a kid in 1971. So this paint style, from the late 60s carried up to probably like 1973, maybe 74, like I'll explain soon in the video. I'm going to post pictures, though, of what I feel is the oldest skull I've ever seen, which I believe is from the late 60s. And it's got the same exact coloring on it, but it looks really crude and different. It's owned by a big toy collector and mask collector that goes by the name of Toy Ranch. And it is definitely, I would say, one of the coolest skulls I've ever seen. So, Toy Ranch, if you're watching this and you ever go to sell that skull, I hope you think of me. So here is what it looks like. The skull was originally sculpted by Pat Newman. She sculpted this for Don Post Studios, and it came out in 1967. And that is why we'll see copyright dates on the back of a lot of the skulls. Like this one here, you'll see a date of 1967 with a copyright symbol. Now that copyright date is carried through all the way onto most, all the skulls, all the way up to like 1983. So you can have skulls from 1980, 1978, 1982, and they're all going to have 1967 on them, but a lot of them will have a second date on them also. So just because you see that on a mask does not mean it's from 67, because that's the original copyright. That plastisol material predates the vinyl that's used in all the other skulls and masks, and I'll get into the timeline of when they switched over. But one of the cooler things about the old Brown skulls, in my opinion, are the paint jobs, the paint styles. You can see that it's real crude looking, and they kind of took a sponge for a stippling job and flew all over this, and you can see all the sponge marks on it. I just love that about this. Not every old Brown skull looks just like this. They all have their different style to them, but they're similar. Some actually have a second color on them. Which is kind of rare. But these pop up on eBay once in a while. You're not going to see them as much as you'll see the later white skulls. Guys are trying to snatch these up, and they're getting a little harder to get, and the prices are kind of climbing on them. I think they're probably in the $200 to $300 range most of the time, unless they're really damaged. The earliest documentation where I see the skull available for sale is something called a Monster Series ad. It's like a one-page ad that I believe was sent to costume shops and whatnot, so you can order these for your inventory. I'm going to show a picture of that ad right now. It's not really an ad, it's like a catalog picture. Okay, so you saw several masks on there, and most of those masks in that ad were all made around 1967. So I believe that ad probably ran for a couple years. Not an ad, it's a catalog picture. And the two skulls you see here are on that page. One just titled Skull, which is, you would get this if you order one. You get one of the old plastisol brown skulls. And another one titled Vermilion. And the Vermilion, if you noticed, has solid eye sockets. And the name Vermilion comes from a mineral that was ground up into powder and used as a pigment, like in paints. So that color vermilion is basically what they took the name for and used it on this skull. That vermilion is a very, very rare skull. But these are like the two first skulls available for Don Post back in the late 60s. Now the rest of the masks in that ad, some of them are plastisol, but a few of the others are more like the conventional vinyl, so I'm not too clear on why. I know they were outsourcing these skulls for most of the time until the mid-70s. So the company that was making these and casting them could have been using that plastisol mixture back then, and it's something I'll never know. I don't have the answers to everything, but I'll tell you everything I can. The two masks on each side here are also seen in that old catalog page, and these are also cast out of plastisol. One way to tell if you're looking at a plastisol mask versus vinyl is the inside color of the mask. Aside from it being more brittle and stiff, but these plastisol masks have this creamy colored center, like a I don't know, like a yellowish custard looking color. You can see it in these cracks still where the paint didn't reach on this Carlisle mask. But all of these Plastisol masks are getting pretty desirable, and guys are looking for them all the time because they are the first ones, the originals. And all of these have been remade and reissued later on in later years, but these are the cool ones. You can see here this has that same creamy, like yellowish colored inside. Now most vinyl masks are going to be black inside. Some will be a darker brown. One characteristic of these 1967 masks are the brown base coats on all of them. You can see they all had that dark brown base coat, which is something you really don't see on any other years. Just something I wanted to point out. Now I want to talk about the transition from the Plastisol material to vinyl. Don Post, they weren't doing any of this casting in-house, like I said, until about 1976. So up till then, everything was outsourced on these skulls, and probably other masks as well, that were going to be in this vinyl or Plastisol area and not latex. The latex they were doing at the studio. There is an ad besides that catalog picture. If you look in like the old Famous Monsters magazine, issue 108, there's an ad in there which features the old skull and the old red vermilion I showed you. And those two masks carry all the way up to that issue, which was released in 1974. So in my opinion, these Plastisol skulls pretty much ended in 1974, around the time of that ad. Because after that, you started seeing vinyl skulls. And they were still a weird brown. They weren't quite that deep, richer brown. They were more of a chocolate looking brown. I kind of started calling these chocolate brown, and guys stuck with it. So you'll see that term on eBay and stuff. But that is a vinyl skull now and not Plastisol. And like I said, that ad in Famous Monsters number 108 came out in 1974, and they were still the old Plastisol skulls, because the vermilion in that old style wasn't made in vinyl until like later in 1976. So at that point in 74, you're definitely still getting the old Plastisol skulls. One thing I want to talk about, or just add here real quickly, is that now in 1975 to 1976, the masks are solid brown. The vinyl is cast in a solid color. Not like the old one, it was that light cream color, then the brown base was painted on it, and then the top coat. So you're now into a solid vinyl color, and one coat goes over that. So it's a much simpler process. You don't have a two-step paint job. And I was told that these masks were coming in the wrong color. I know they're brown like the old ones, but I believe these were supposed to be the first black and white skulls, because the Don Post employees told me these were wrong. They were being outsourced. They were coming in wrong. And one thing that kind of makes me think it was supposed to be black is if you look at another mask that was made at the same exact time in 1976, which is the Rainbow Carlisle. This is a later reboot of that old one I showed you to begin with. Now, these masks, if you really study them closely, are brown vinyl. And they had to go and paint the black hair on it, like in this area they airbrushed black hair on it. It's my guess, or I'm thinking, they probably wanted this black as well, both black vinyl, and they came out brown. Because why would they want to cast that in brown and make the hair black like that? It just doesn't make sense. Just a thought. Okay, now in 1976 we get our second copyright update. As you can see here, Now the masks are saying 1967, 1976. Well, they used to say just 67. And you're also going to notice here, let me turn this, there's a definite size difference. They're getting smaller. Now the way these vinyl masks were produced was through a metal mold like this, not the plaster mold like you see in latex production. They went into a machine called a rotocasting machine. So this metal mold would go upside down, and it's hollow, so there's a hole on the bottom. You pour in the liquid, and it would be heated up, and this thing will turn all different directions, spinning that liquid all on the inside of this mold. And eventually, when it cools, you pull out your blank copy made of vinyl. Now with regular latex production, you can make like master copies of these masks. You can't do that with the metal molds. You have to make a wax positive. So like when these would wear out, they would make a wax casting, like a wax positive. They'd retool it, fix up the problems, and then make another metal mold. Now through this process, over and over, they started getting smaller. You would lose size. So now you're going to see definite size differences. Let me get another skull here. You're going to see the skulls are definitely shrinking. And that's one of the main reasons, from the retooling of the damaged molds on the wax positives. That is the jumbo old school 67 size, and that's the later 1976 now. And this is a 76 mold. It's a real Don Post Studios mold. I've only seen 2 of these ever, and you can see how the 67 mask is even larger than the entire mold, because the pull out of here is smaller than this mold. It's going to be the size of the inside, diameter, and pull it out, and it's about that big. So you can see things are starting to change. And this isn't like as far as it goes. I've seen skulls that were so tiny they look like only a little child could wear them. It gets crazy. I have some photos I'll post and show you the extreme differences in these skulls. So if you're really shopping for a real nice skull, I would kind of ask, like if it's in an auction, I would just say, hey, can you measure it for me? And maybe I'll give you guys measurements in the end of this video of these jumbos and these middle-sized ones, just so you can kind of see where they should be. But or just get pictures of them, shot next to a mask you're familiar with or something, because they are all over the place with sizes. There were many skull molds made through the process. You're talking, 1967 all the way up to 83. A lot of molds. So that's why you see so many different sizes of these things. And later in the 70s, a lot of different variations were born, and we'll get into that soon. Alright, I was kind of getting at earlier that you can't just date, usually you can't date a mask just by the date on the back of it. But some you can. In 1976, there was an obvious change to one of the molds, and then I think several were made from it. But in 76, they retooled the teeth from the old school look to this new look, and they have this new indented tooth on it, as you can see there. Take a good look at both of those. I call it, I kind of coined the term snaggletooth, and it's stuck with it with collectors, and a lot of people just call that the snaggletooth sculpt, style now. But that started in 1976, and they used this mold, or this style mold. There's probably several made once they made the wax positive. That snaggletooth style was carried on into these ghost skulls, into red blood skulls, into vermilions, into white skulls, into glow skulls. So you'll see this style. It's very popular. It's everywhere in the mid to late 70s. You'll see lots of these snaggletooth style skulls. So that's one thing to look for. I can easily look at the front of this mask and say, oh, that's definitely the 76 sculpt because of the teeth. So some of these you can tell when they were kind of made, like you could pinpoint the exact year, especially with the colors, and we'll get into that next. Funny thing is, in 1977, they came out with the old school teeth again. I don't know why, but they definitely were using both at the same time. You'll find later masks in different variations. They will have that 76 style skull, like these red skulls I'm going to show you later. You'll see a 76 sculpt, and then you'll see the 77 sculpt. And they're two different masks. They're two different shapes, two different sizes. So I don't know why, but they went back to that classic look with a mask that they sculpted or retooled in '77. So it starts to get a little confusing, especially with sizes and styles. One thing I need to mention is late 1976, at some point, Don Post got their own rotocasting machine in-house. No longer do they need to outsource any of these vinyl skulls or any other vinyl masks for that matter. So from here at this point on, you'll probably notice they start kind of going crazy, making all kinds of cool skulls. In 76 and 77, there was a little explosion of skulls here, and we'll get into all these different colors and what these variations are, but from this point on, they're all being made in-house. 1977 is the first year for a glow-in-the-dark skull, and they call it the Ghost Skull. And this is a one-year-only process now that I'm going to tell you about. In '77, they mixed the glow pigment directly into the vinyl, into the liquid vinyl. So the masks came out looking like this cool yellow color, and these are the only masks that look like this. In the whole history of Don Post, these four are the only ones. And these are all glow-in-the-dark masks. If you look in the '77 catalog pictures, you'll see these four glowing in the dark. I'll show a picture of them also glowing. But the next year they changed the whole process and they no longer look like this. They also dropped those two out of the line. They're gone. But those are Haunted Mansion characters, by the way, from Disney. The Gravedigger in the middle there, Mr. Leech, and Mr. Mortimer. These are very rare. The skull being super rare, as well as Gravedigger. A set like this could probably cost you, if you're able to complete one, could take you a long time. Probably well over $2,000, you know. I think some of these just went on eBay for $500 or $600 a piece. I've sold two of these skulls for about $600 each, I think. Now I wish I had them back, but these are very sought after. About 6 or 7 years ago, nobody was paying attention to these skulls at all. Then all of a sudden, we realized they are super rare. I think there's maybe, I don't know, 6 that I know of out there total, versus, you know, 100 white ones I've seen or more. So if you ever find these, I'm always looking to buy them. It depends on the condition though too, what they're worth, but contact me for sure. I'll post some nice photos of the two that I had together. Okay, 1977. Don Post decides to bring the Vermilion back. And that is the solid eye version that we originally saw come out in 1967 as one of the first skulls. Very rare. So they brought that guy back in '77. I guess, I don't know if it's because it was a 10-year anniversary for these skulls or not, but this mask is cast in solid vinyl. It's not plastisol like the original. Everything's vinyl these days. But the vermilion mask is cast in a weird flesh-colored vinyl like that. See it? And they're painted red. I'm pretty sure I know exactly why they were casting the vermilions in the weird flesh color, and that is because of this red paint procedure. Red is very difficult to get to pop over like a dark color. Like, you don't want to make a black skull and then paint it red. If you want that red to really pop, you want a base color like this light cream color. Really makes the red intense. I recently painted one of the old black blanks that are floating around out there, and first I painted it a light beige or cream color, then I shot the red on it, and the red looks so rich and intense over that lighter base color. You could use white also, but it's going to look super intense, and I didn't want it to be too bright, but a nice rich color. So that's pretty much why they casted them in that color. I just mentioned for a minute about the black blanks that are floating around. When Don Post Studios closed, there was a big liquidation on eBay where all the old molds were selling, and a handful of blank skulls were found. And they are vinyl, they're not latex, they're black factory vinyl blanks. And they were used, this metal mold down here was actually used to create them. Like an additional mold was made off of that metal mold, and they made these black blanks. They are not very old. A lot of guys are claiming they're original 70s blanks from 76 because they're dated 76, but they are not. The vinyl is so fresh and new, it doesn't resemble anything that an old vinyl skull will. And I'm assuming they were probably casted somewhere in the 2000s, but they were a real factory blank. I'm going to post a few pictures of one that I just repainted for somebody. I owned quite a few when they came out in auction, and I sold them all off, and I wish I kept them, but they're really cool. So here's what the black blanks look like, and then I'll show you how I did paint the creamy base coat, like the beige base coat, and then finally I turned it into a red vintage vermilion look just like this. So you're gonna see my paint scheme that looks like this. It's not this mask, it's gonna be a new blank I painted to look like that. So here is that procedure. Figured I would show you the two vermilions side by side so you can really see the difference. The Plastisol 1967, which is a jumbo, really big size skull, and then the later 1976 vinyl version. You can see it's shorter top to bottom. Different like structure in the teeth. They look different when you really study them. This vermilion came from this metal mold. That's the mold that vermilion came out of. Same exact mold. These old 67 vermilions had two different paint schemes. One they hand painted the teeth on, and this one is all airbrushed. I think this is probably the older look with the all airbrushing here. I'll post the side-by-side pictures of the two vermilion styles from back then. I think the other one had a different eye variation too. All right, now we're looking at a 1978 glow skull. They no longer are selling the yellow ones like we saw earlier. They dropped that pigment deal. Now they cast the skull in black vinyl, solid black vinyl, and then painted on the glow paint. And all of the glow skulls for 78, like into 79, have this dark, dirty, dingy kind of appearance. Some might look a little better with a little heavier paint, but that is a characteristic of them. Don't think it's just completely worn out, because they all kind of look like this. And I want to add that this is the jumbo, the biggest size skull you can get, that giant 67 mold, which tells us at some point they probably found an old 67 mold and used it and started pumping out masks in 1978 with them. Remember, in the 70s the skulls were shrinking, so you're gonna have skulls all different sizes now. I had 5 of these glow skulls all next to each other, and the smallest one was so tiny, it was like the size of a softball can fit inside of it. It was so small. I'll post a side-by-side photo of those two next to each other. Most of them you'll find are going to be those 76 sculpt snaggletooth styles. Once in a while you'll see a big jumbo glow skull like this, but they're rare, very rare. Here you can see that the Gravedigger is also this style now. Remember, I showed you the solid yellow vinyl 77 style. All the glow masks from this point on, 78, 79, were cast in vinyl, and the glow was painted on. So you could see those are glow masks there. That Carlisle's a glow style, but they're all that weird grayish, yellowish, color. No more ghost style. And these skulls, like I was saying, you'll find them in 76 sculpts. You'll find them in 77 with the original teeth back. You'll find them in the jumbo 67 mold. You'll see many, many glow skulls. It's probably the skull you'll find the most variations of as far as size and shape. Okay, the Vermilion was always advertised in the 1977 and 1978 Don Post catalog. However, this skull on the right was nowhere to be seen. They were produced, and they're out there, and no one ever seen them in any catalogs or ads. I constantly would ask people, if you see some kind of documentation where this skull was sold by Don Post, please send it to me, because we never knew the official name of it. I started calling it a blood skull because later, around 1990, Don Post did produce something they called a blood skull. It was a solid red skull with open eyes, but in latex. And I would tell people, the only Vermilions I see for sale or advertised for sale by Don Post had the solid eye sockets. So I said, I'm not going to call that a Vermilion, even though it's red, and Vermilion is the name of that pigment, like I mentioned earlier. But anywhere Don Post ever advertised a Vermilion, it looks like that, or the old school one. So just today, I finally cracked the code on what that mask is, and here is the story. This was in the Vermilion was in the 77 catalog, and they carried it into the 78 catalog, like I just explained. However, people were complaining that they could not see out of those tiny eye holes, and later in 1978 they stopped producing this Vermilion even though its photograph is in the 78 catalog, they started cutting the eyes out and selling them as this skull. So if you looked at the 78 catalog, you would see this picture just like the year before. But if you ordered one from Don Post, this would show up in the mail because they had a hard time seeing out of that. So what they started doing was casting these in solid red vinyl, as you can see, which saved quite a bit of time with the paint process. They no longer had to do a two-step paint process. Actually more than that, 3 steps. You can see the cream color vinyl. Then they would paint this red, airbrush the black highlights, do the white teeth. So now it's a solid red vinyl, and all I had to do was put some black highlights on it, paint the teeth. No more solid eyes. So in reality, that would be a vermilion that would show up if you ordered it, but you would think it's coming looking like that. So that is the real story behind this mysterious red skull that I never knew. And I would argue with people. I'd say that's not a vermilion, these are vermilions, and I'm gonna call it a blood skull. So, you know, I was wrong, but like I said, I'm not the expert here. I was just trying to figure things out over the years with all these skulls, and I was close. Okay. It isn't, in my opinion anyway, it isn't till all the way up till 1980 that these stark white, bright white skulls are showing up. You know, this whole time, there's a lot of evidence right under your noses in the catalog photos. If you look at the little tiny catalog pictures in all these old catalogs, you're going to start noticing things. First of all, the 1977 to 79 catalog shows the skulls in full color, but they look just like this. You're going to notice that they're this weird brown vinyl skull, and they look nothing like those white skulls. Go study it's the same picture for 77, 78, 79. They're all the same photo they used, but it's this skull. It's this weird brown vinyl skull. So not until 1980 do you see a white skull advertised in a Don Post catalog. I'm guessing that they did not come out with a white skull like this up till 1980, and they carried it into 1982. And the big jumbo size like this one is what you see in in the movie Halloween 3. In 1982, they were filming Halloween 3, and they were using these big jumbo white skulls. So, and I want to add that there's many sizes of white skulls. So, at that time, they're still using all these different molds, but you're going to see many different sizes in these white skulls. But I'm guessing they only made them, you know, for 2 or 3 years, a few years. That's it. But they pumped out lots of them. Now, on these white skulls, you'll see a lot of different dates. Like I was saying previously in the video, just 1967 on this copy. This is actually a 77 now. The one I showed you that had the new style teeth introduced again after 76. Well, what's common on a 77, most people don't know they have them because they only see one date. But if you look real close there, you can see those 2 7s right there. And this, I don't think they were cut in very deep when they did that date on the mold, so the paint always filled in those little numbers. But a 77, you should be able to make out part of the 7s. And then that front of it it's a little different looking skull than the jumbo for sure. You can see that's like a different shape altogether. So from now on, when you start looking at these skulls online or on eBay, just start studying the shapes of them, because they're not all the same, and they're definitely not all the same sizes. Now I have to mention one really strange skull out there that I do not know when it was made, and there are very, very few of them. It's not any of these. There is a really strange, like, guys call it purple vinyl skull. They'll say there's a purple vinyl skull, and what I think it is actually brown vinyl, like this brown, the chocolate brown, and it has a weird hue to it where it actually kind of looks purplish on the inside of the mask. Now, the mask is kind of white, but it's also green. So it's like a white and green skull made on this brown looking, almost purple vinyl. And it looks like something that was dug up in a grave because of the green mossy appearance to it. I do not have a copy here. A friend of mine owns one, and I'm going to post a few photos of it here, and you can check them out. Now, I've only seen maybe 2 to 3 copies that look like this. So take a good look at this, and if you ever see one with green on it, it's one of these skulls. It's the only skull that will have green paint. And like I said, guys think it's purple, but I think it's actually brown, and it has a weird color on the inside that gives it a purplish effect. So here is that skull. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now, when was that made? That is the question. Is that the missing link from the chocolate vinyl, mid 70s up to the 1980 white skull? Did they start making, some weird white and green dingy looking skulls between these two? It is very, very possible, especially because the vinyl is not too far off from that color if you really study those photos. So very possible that thing was made somewhere between 76 and 1980. The world may never know. If I do find out, I'll do a follow-up video. Okay, here we go. The most important role this skull ever had was being in the movie Halloween 3. It was part of the big 3. And what you saw on the screen was the big jumbo white skulls. Tom Atkins was wearing it. You saw them for sale in the stores. And I think the other Snaggletooth one could have made an appearance somewhere in the film. I'm trying to remember, but 100% the big skull is what you're seeing all over that movie. In 1982, there was old ads in Fangoria magazine for these. And there was an old 83 catalog ad. But if you ordered these or bought these at a costume shop, you did not receive this big white skull. You received a glow skull. It looks completely different. So the white one was in the film, but the glow skull is what you would receive if you bought these. And the whole timeline I've come up with pretty much makes sense when we led up all the way up to the point where 1980, 81, 82, the white ones were being produced. Now in 82, they're in the film. So it kind of all fell into place, I think. Now I'm going to show you what that glow skull looks like that you would get if you did buy these. That is the real Halloween 3 glow skull you would have got if you bought these masks in 1982 or 83. This is a factory tagged with the Shamrock mask. This is very rare. These glow skulls look quite different than any of the other old 78s I showed you. It's my opinion that they put a different or a thicker coat of glow paint on them to make them resemble the old white movie skull more. Because if they sent you, if you ordered these masks back then, you saw the film and saw that white one, and you got that old dingy looking 78 skull in the mail, you'd probably be like, what the hell, that doesn't look like the movie skull. So I think they want it to glow in the dark, and they made it look a little brighter white than the previous glow skulls. The Witch and Pumpkin were not glow in the dark. They're powdered, like fluorescent day glow powdered pigment. They'll glow under black light, but they are not glow in the dark masks. If you look at the old tuxedo ad, which is in the 83 catalog, there's 3 guys wearing tuxedos and they have these masks on. You'll see that glow skull, but it is the snaggletooth style in the ad. So once again, they at least used 2 different sculpts for that H3 glow skull. In 1983, Don Post came out with their Cast of Characters campaign in the new catalog. You'll see like old tags that'll say Cast of Characters, and if you page the old catalog, you'll see it on every page, and they show all these different characters wearing masks and whatnot. So at that time, masks were being sold in boxes, and I have a photo of a very rare piece, and it's the only one I've ever seen, but it's an original Cast of Characters box that the skull came in at that time. So I'm going to show the only photo I have of it. There might be some other pictures out there somewhere, but it's the only one I saved all these years. If anybody owns that thing, I would love to buy it and put it in the collection here. So if you ever find one or locate that one, please let me know. Here is that box. That is pretty much all you need to know on the vinyl skull production and history. We should have titled the video "The History of the Don Post Vinyl Skull," because 1983 was the end of vinyl. 84, they started producing masks in latex. So you'll find latex skulls in the next catalog in 1984. They are very thin. They lack all of these great details. This actually is a latex skull that was in an earlier 80s catalog. I didn't mention it because it's latex. But be careful when you're looking on eBay, because sometimes people will take a latex one, stuff it so nice, you may mistake it for one of these, and when you get it in the mail, you're going to say, what the heck, this doesn't even look close to having the details that these do, and it's paper thin latex. So I'm really not going to get into any history on these, anything 1984 and beyond, because I'm just not into them, and I only like the vintage stuff. So hope that helps, and that is the end of the vinyl skull. Alright, I hope that was somewhat enjoyable. I know it's long and probably boring to most of you, but there's a lot of people out there with lots of questions on these skulls all the time. So if you learned anything, you learned that there were lots of molds and many different sizes of these things. So if you ever have any more questions on these, I'll be happy to try and answer them for you. After this, I'll measure a couple of the different sizes and kind of keep it here so you can use it as a guide If you ever have a skull in your hands, you'll be able to tell if it's jumbo or just a medium-sized one. So thanks again, and I will talk with you guys again soon. Bye.